to answer a number of questions about the Pasyon. But first, before we go into the topic of my book and the advance of looking at sources that has occurred over the past few years, let me just very briefly talk about the Pasyon and the Pabasa for those of you who are not very familiar with the context. Okay, Pabasa is a popular Lenten ritual consisting of chanting verses from a narrative point on the passion, life, and death of Jesus Christ. In fact, it goes beyond the passion, death of Jesus Christ because it also talks about the creation of the world, some source from the Old Testament, and finally the culmination of our world, which when it comes to an end, some say on May 19th of this year. I don't know if you believe that. Some say in July 24th of this year, Jesus will come again. Okay. So let's see the context of this point. So the Pabasa is a chant. In the text used is called the Pasyon, sometimes spelled variously, or variously with a Y. Both are acceptable spellings. The most popular of this text is the Pasyong Mahal or the Pasyong Genesis. Here is a copy of the Pasyon Genesis, this cover. As you can see, it is a recent edition. You can still buy this if you go to Quiapo or some of the churches, especially during Lent. You can buy a copy of the Pasyon Genesis. And I just downloaded this from the internet to show you that the Pabasa is alive and well with the time tag Pabasa 2019. Okay, so here are some pictures that I just randomly last night hurriedly searched the internet just to give a sense of what this is all about. Here's a picture of a Pabasa at home, and people are chanting from a book. They're holding it in their hands, and so this is one context in which the Pabasa or the chanting of this poem is done. It is done in a house. Another picture of a Pabasa at home. And usually for the Pabasa, people will put up an altar, so they bring out religious images like the crucifix. The favorite ones are the images of Jesus associated with the Passion, namely the Jesus Nazareno. Some Pabasa's altars get a little bit more elaborate. Here's one, probably, I think it must have been prepared in somebody's garage or something, where you have two banks of tables of people facing each other so they can chant the verses antiphonally. Right. So your sense of design comes in here, and your fashion sense is kind of a garden type Pabasa. Again, done in somebody's backyard between two houses. To the right, you will see the neighbor's air conditioning unit sticking, so it must be between two houses. And this Pabasa is often broadcasted using loudspeakers. So unless you're familiar with this tradition and know what it is all about, you'll be absolutely irritated when you hear women say, because that's how they sing. They kind of sing with this broken type of tone, which is supposed to be kind of an elevated type of tone. Pabasas can take on monumental dimensions. As for example, this is a kubol. It is a temporary structure that was built in Makati Viejo. If you don't know what Makati Viejo is, the only Makati you know is the Makati of the Ayalas. Okay? Makati Viejo is the old Makati, and there's somebody very familiar with Makati Viejo there. You can ask Joey Meroy. He is from there. It is also called sometimes Poblacion. That is the old Makati, not the Makati of Ayala and Makmiki that came as a 1960 development. This is the real Makati. Okay? Right? Makati, by the way, doesn't mean itchy. Okay? It seems that the root word for that is kati, which means tide. Okay? Makati, or maybe it should be probably pronounced Makati, where the tide changes. The tide is about the tide of the Pasig River, which goes up and down depending on the time of the day and the season of the year. So this is a kubol in Makati Viejo. I did some studies of this about 8 years ago. Another kubol from Makati Viejo. And I just download this from the net to tell you that this is an alive and well tradition. There's a traffic advisory from the City Hall of Makati telling you the rerouting of the traffic during Holy Week when the pabasas in the Pobols in Makati take over. This is the Makati of Jeju Marbinay. This is the totoong Makati. This is in a sense the core Makati of Makati. There are many places like this, even in Metro Manila, like Tramo, where the Pasyon tradition is very alive and well, and even made more lively because they have a living dramatization of the Pasyon text. We call it the Sinaculo. Marikina also still is alive with these traditions, and Tondo, of course. The Tondo during Holy Week is very different from the Tondo that that people associate it with, and even a place as busy as Divisoria becomes quiet when the pabasa begins. The author, Rinaldo Ileto, wrote a book, Passion and Revolution, and talked about how important the story of the Passion of our Lord, as narrated in the Pasyong Mahal, is to the consciousness of Filipinos to understand the world. It created kind of a worldview, a world where people had a sense of what was right and wrong. And Ileto's thesis is that Passion of our Lord was used by the common people to understand the political situation of what was happening to the Filipinos during the time of the Spanish Revolution. So I got very interested in the Pasyong Mahal and asked myself, what is the history? When I started doing this text, I was fascinated with biblical exegesis. In fact, one of the iterations of my life is I wanted to become a biblical exegete. Okay? And I started actually learning the ancient languages until I got the cuneiform. That's the Mesopotamian language that people call the chicken scratch. And I began to realize that chicken scratch might be more difficult to crack than the Paleography of 17th or 18th century Spanish texts. So, but I learned from that episode of working with the biblical text to ask questions about what is the history of the Pasyon text and its transmission? What are its sources? What was the context in which the Pasyon and subsequently the Pabasa, what was the context in which it arose? And what precisely is its content, and how does it relate to the literature of the era from which it was born, which the Pasyon Mahal is dated to the 19th century. The edition that we're using today, the Pasyon Mahal, was censored in 1814 by Mariano Pilapil, who was a diocesan clergy, a Filipino, and became rector of the San Jose Seminary at the time. So, I just like to focus on a section of my book, where I created some advances in a way, and this is just the textual history of the Pasyon. The presentation then will focus on the textual history of the Pasyon, and I would like to present some new information that I have discovered through archives and also through the digitally available books, and that will now clarify the history. This history will explain the literary dependence within the Tagalog Pasyon and the Pasyon in other vernaculars, particularly Cebuano or Cebuano. This is a picture from my book, The Genealogy of the Pasyon Text. It is divided into 3 columns. First, you have the Pasyon in Tagalog, which seems to be the core Pasyon. Okay? Then you have the Passions that are translated into the vernaculars, but dependent on the Tagalog text. So you do have, for example, the Kasasana Pasyong Mahal was translated into Ilonggo by Mariano Perfecto. It becomes Kinabuhi kag Pasyon ni Kristo ng Ginoo naton. And then there's also a Kapampangan version, but since I do not know Kapampangan, I will not dare to pronounce Kapampangan with all its Q and E and its tongue twisters. There's also the Ilocano version, Biak Apo tayo Jesu Cristo, Ket Maria. So for some reason in Ilocano, the Pasyon becomes the life of Jesus and Mary. I don't know how Mary got in, but anyway, in the title, she's already in. And then there are Passions, the third column are Passions that are not related to the Tagalog. They're not translations, they're not dependent on the Tagalog. They did not source the Tagalog, they did not come from the Tagalog text. They seem to be independent texts. one of the oldest passions that I studied, and it was really not me who discovered this passion. In fact, it was known by literary scholars. It's a 1703, some say 1704, Pasyon of Gaspar Aquino de Belen. Dr. Benvenido Lovera, in his seminal work, Tagalog Poetry, proved the literary dependence of the 1814 Pasyon Mahal to the 1703 or the 18th century Pasyon of Gaspar Aquino de Belen. Now let's focus on the Pasyon of Gaspar Aquino de Belen because it becomes very interesting in the story and how discovery of sources has solved some of my literary and historic conundrums. Gaspar Aquino de Belen was a layperson. He was not a priest. He worked as the master printer in the Jesuit printing press, La Compañía, in the early 1700s. But apparently he was also a poet of his own right and a good linguist because he helped the Jesuits translate some foreign books into Filipino. And one of the books that he translated was a book for the dying, written by a Spanish Jesuit by the name of Tomas de Villacastin. Tomas de Villacastin's book is entitled Recomendación de las Almas. And Gaspar Aquino de Belen translate this as panalangin pagtatagubilin sa kaluluwa ng taong naghihingalo. Somehow in translation, the Spanish just expands. It has metamorphoses, no? Just like paella becomes Valenciana and Bringe. So then Bringe gets stickier and heavier. So to that text, Gaspar Aquino de Belen adds his own original work and entitles it, Mahal na Pasyon na Jesucristo, Panginoon natin na tula. The work does not appear in the title page of the book that was printed in the Jesuit press because the book carried the title, Recomendación de las Almas sa Panalangin Pagtatagubilin sa Kaluluwa ng Taong Naghihingalo. You'll only find out because Gaspar Aquino de Belen's text if you read the story to the end. Okay? So if you look to the end, then you see it is a 960 stanza poem on the life of Jesus Christ. Dr. Lovera believes that it, and many literary scholars believe that it is a masterpiece of Filipino poetry of that era. In fact, many literary scholars say that the Passion of 1814 is so dependent on the 1704 text that some say the 1814 really plagiarizes the 1703 text. Long time ago, they didn't really care about those things. We get very queasy when you see blocks and blocks of text being quoted by another text. At that time, the quotation of an older text was a sign that you were not changing anything, that you were very faithful to the tradition, but you built on the tradition and then you expanded it. Okay, so. Because maybe at that time, people did not really think of their work as property. They thought of it as a work of devotion, as a work of opening your soul to God. And I guess the attitude of authors at that time, oh, copy all you want of what I write as long as you get closer to God. Okay? Because you're not gonna make money out of this anyway. You're not going to make money out of this. Now, the Pasyon of Gaspar Aquino de Belen needs a horrible end, abrupt end, because the Jesuits are expelled from the Philippines in 1768. And in May of that year, Manuel Galban, the government assessor, is enjoined to go to the Jesuit property and confiscate whatever they found there. And a record of Galban's actuation shows that he actually confiscated about 1,000 copies of the Passion. Okay. But it was a later edition already, the editions of the 1760, fifth printing actually, and some of those texts were not even bound at all. I discovered another text from the documents of the suppression of the Society of Jesus, in which a very famous printer, Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay, better known for his map of the Philippines of 1734, which was designed by Father Pedro Murillo Velarde. He was a master printer when the Jesuits were expelled from the Philippines, and he was compelled by Galban to bring back to the Jesuit College in Intramuros copies of the Pasyon that apparently Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay had brought to his home in Binondo to ask the Chinese to bind them. So at that time they were already, outsourcing. You want to do anything well, bring it to China. So they brought it to the Chinese in Binondo to bind the books. So from then on, the Pasyon of Gaspar Aten de Belen seems to disappear from the scene. Now, when I was working on the Pasyon, one of the things that struck me was that there was a Cebuano Pasyon. I knew it as a manuscript kept in the Chinese University archive, and it had no date, as many manuscripts in the Philippines have no date. So I just put it, I don't know where to put it, okay? And then I realized as I was comparing the Tagalog Pasyon of Gaspar Aten de Belen with this text, also with the Kasaysayan, that in fact the Cebuano Pasyon was much closer to the Gaspar Aten de Belen text. Later I also found almost exact copies of that manuscript, of that Pasyon, with a much later date. Okay, one is in the 1900s and one is in the early 20th century. Now, simply because these texts were printed later and the manuscript was there, does not mean that the manuscript is necessarily older. Because it's a phenomenon in the Philippines that even printed books are copied, at least in the 19th century and the early 20th century, especially in the provinces, where perhaps the availability of the printed text was not available. So people would just simply, can I just borrow your book, and they would copy them by hand. Okay? I do have right now a dictionary which binds me in a conundrum. I don't know the exact provenance of it because it has no title page or anything. It came from Panglao Island. I still have to do the textual study to finally determine if what I have is a dictionary that was that is completely different from what we know, or it is actually a handwritten copy of a previously printed dictionary. Because in my research also in archives of parishes, I have found some strange things like a printed missal from parish church established by the Recollect Order had a supplement to it of other masses that apparently this missal had lost over time, handwritten. So somebody had patiently copied another missal, stuck it in between the pages just to repair the damages. So when you're dealing with Philippine documents, you gotta be a little bit careful to assert that the manuscript is really older than the printed text. Anyway, how do you link this text with Aquino de Belen? If apparently Aquino de Belen's text had been confiscated in 1768 and stopped circulating. I hypothesized at that time that the text of Gaspar Aten de Belen may have continued and may have persisted beyond the 1768. Okay. So, to understand this, I was helped by a lot of research in the Archaeological Archives of Manila. Okay? There's a whole section in the Archaeological Archives of Manila which very few people have looked at. Maybe I'm the only person, I'm not sure. It's called Censura de los Libros. It is the censorship record, and it's boring because as usual, it's legal. It's these canon lawyers squabbling whether this text is what do we do with this text, etc., etc. It sounds like professors sitting at the end of a doctoral dissertation arguing should we pass this person or not. And one professor is a stickler of footnotes. There's no period, wrong footnoting, etc., etc. So it's as boring as that. Every now and then there's a treasure. So after going to those boring censorship notes, I kind of came up with a timeline of the Pasyon. So in 1814, the Pasyong Mahal was censored by the priest Mariano Pilapil because there were allegations that a manuscript of the Pasyon was going around which contained erroneous doctrine, and the Catholic Church wanted an official text. So Mariano Pilapil did the text, and that is what we know today as the Pasyon Genesis. A year afterwards, Miguel de Valdivia, who was a printer, asked permission to reprint the Pasyon de Cuatro Evangelistas. It says, censored by Father Mansilla. The censorship note cites a few verses from the so-called censored text, and to me it was obviously Gaspar Aquino de Belen's Pasyon. In other words, what 1815 document tells me is that this Pasyon of Gaspar Aquino de Belen continued to persist, but it stopped having its name and was simply called the Cuatro Evangelistas. Now, Valdivia was not able to present this text and have it reprinted because he was denounced by a certain Manuel Memije, another printer who was probably his rival. Memije said that the Valdivia wrote an anonymous letter denouncing his own Pasyon called the Troncales. So Archbishop Juan de Solaybar, who was bishop from 1804 to 1824, orders that both the Troncales and the Cuatro Evangelistas pass to censorship once more. But then his canon lawyers told him, one of the texts was already approved by the censors. Canon law says you cannot censor already a censored text. And apparently the Troncales also passed to the censor, so you cannot censor another censored text. So what do you do? It's vision. Okay? The wise canon lawyer said, let them print it, but add a page of errors, a fe de erratas. Okay? So the one solution, since the permission was given by a previous bishop, this bishop cannot undo that permission. Okay? Exactly a principle of canon law. Once a privilege is given, a privilege cannot be revoked unless it is revoked by a higher authority. Little liturgical tidbit for all of you. In the Philippines and Spain, we are allowed to wear blue-colored vestments for the Feast of the Virgin Mary. All right? It was a right given to all of those in the Spanish realm. It has never been abrogated. Okay? Because the only person that can remove that privilege is the Pope, because it was a papal privilege given to Spain. Okay? So sometimes you see Cardinal Tagle wearing blue. It's not because he's an Atenean, but because of this Marian privilege. Okay, so the same principle applied here. The response then of Solaybar suggests that there is a 19th century edition of Gaspar Aquino de Belen. In fact, there is. And it's one of my finds thanks to the internet and thanks to the availability in digital form of texts in Europe. I had no access to this when I was working on my text, but in the digital section of the Biblioteca Nacional of Spain in Madrid, lo and behold, I find an 1846 edition of a Pasyon de Cuatro Evangelistas printed by the Imprenta de los Amigos del País. It confirms the existence that there was a 19th century edition of Gaspar Aquino de Belen. The censor, Hilarion Diaz, a Franciscan, wrote this. I'm translating it from the Spanish. It seems to me that the locals call the text of the cross or the four evangelists because in the earlier prints produced, the frontispiece was a print of illustration of the four evangelists. It surpasses other writing in Tagalog and is much more conformed to the Holy Gospels. It contains at the same time sound doctrine and exhortations based on the text and applied to the reform of morals. I am not the only one with such opinion, but rather I have often heard from other parish priests who are better informed than I, praises about this small book whose strength of poetic inspiration can be compared with that of Virgil. So many copies of the same Pasyon has been disseminated, none of which have even a minor error. Okay? So high praises for the Gaspar Aquino de Belen. Well, what happened to him? Why did Gaspar Aquino de Belen disappear? Well, in this particular edition, Aquino de Manila''s authorship is completely erased because sa title page, ang may stress list, ang may kata sa wikang Kastila, ang MRP, Most Reverend Father, Muy Reverendo Padre Tomas de Villacastin, Samahan ng Kumpanya de Jesus, at sinalin sa wikang Tagalog ni Don Gaspar Aquino de Manila. So the title page creates the literary confusion. So de Manila disappears. While these same words are actually found in the 1703 Pasyon, the reference is not to Aquino de Manila''s poem or his Pasyon, but to his translation of Villacastin's Recomendación de las Almas, which, as I said earlier, was the first part of a work to which a Pasyon was the second. Okay, so the 1846 Pasyon confirms the observation that the Cebuano Pasyon is based on Aquino de Manila and not the kasaysayan, and that a 19th century edition of Gaspar Aquino de Manila was most likely available so that the Cebuano translation can be made of it. Okay, that's the first text. The second text, I'll just go rather briefly to it because it requires detail. I actually have a fuller paper. I think Jonathan would like to share that with you. You can just ask him to email my fuller paper. And this is another Pasyon text, the 1842 and 43 Pasyon of Aniceto de la Merced. It seems that up to 4 decades afterwards, in the 1840s, there was still a controversy about what is a suitable Pasyon. So Aniceto de la Merced, a Tagalog diocesan priest who was born, it is believed, in Norsagaray in Bulacan, and later became vicar for Rene, representative of the Bishop of Manila in Pampanga, wrote another Pasyon, which is said was going to end the Pasyon controversy because this was the best Pasyon ever. So his question against the orthodoxy of the older text, although as we saw, Leon Diaz said that the Gaspar Aquino de Manila is very, very sound and well written. So de la Merced's Pasyon is really a more sophisticated and unorthodox version, but he was not allowed to publish. His manuscript was confiscated by the diocesan censors and kept in the diocesan archives of Manila, where I found it after it was sleeping for more than 100 years. Okay, so what have I done with that Pasyon text? I'm still in the process actually of working through the manuscript. I have finished the transcription, not with great difficulty because the calligraphy is very clear. Okay. Now, I am more or less happy with this textual history. I know how it came about, and now what I'm doing now is analyzing the text and annotating it, and hopefully maybe I can have a fuller version of this 1842 and 1843 text, and then talk about its relationship to the better known Pasyon of Aniceto de la Merced, which was not published until 1852, okay, which is called El Libro de la Vida, Historia Sagrada, Constantas de Fisones y Morales. So, I hope you realize that to write history, it is good to be founded on solid evidence, on actually seeing the text. You make hypotheses and you hope somehow you can prove it. Sometimes it takes 20 years and a lot of luck to confirm a hypothesis you made, like I did some 20 years ago. Thank you.